aware of that. And with that, I'm going to kick this off today. I'd like to introduce our first presenter today, James Sly. James is a specialist in forest health with the North Carolina Forest Service. And Jim, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, good to be here. And let me get my slides up. I'm Jim Sly. I'm the Forest Health Program Head for the North Carolina Forest Service. And I also want to welcome you on behalf of the North Carolina State Board of Registration for Foresters. And I'm the past chair of that organization. I turned that over to Sierra Ward this year. But what does the North Carolina Forest Service Forest Health Program do? What is our role? And we actually are part of the Forest Protection Division, which includes the fire program, the law enforcement program, as well as our forest health program. We are an outreach of the U.S. Forest Service Forest Health Protection Program under the state and private forestry aspect of that organization. And as part of that, we deal with not only the invasives that people hear about so frequently, but also native insects, native diseases, abiotic damage, such as tornado damage, hurricane damage, flood damage, ice, and so forth. And we also deal with those invasive insects, pathogens, and plants that we have so frequently today. We also have a forest health monitoring program that is in charge of monitoring the status, changes, and trends in our forests. And we produce several publications, including the Forest Health Highlights, which this presentation will in large part touch on the different aspects of our previous year's Forest Health Highlights from fiscal year 2022. And that can be found at the link on your screen. And there's a picture of what that document looks like. And there's other publications that we produce as well. And with that, I'm going to turn this program over to our forest health specialist from the eastern and western part of the state. Our eastern forest health specialist is Jim Moeller, and our western forest health specialist is Brian Heath. And we also have two other positions, a forest health technician in each of those areas, and we have a forest health monitoring coordinator's position as well, which is vacant at this point in time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Moeller for some forest health highlights from the eastern part of North Carolina.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see, get this going here. All right, as Jim Sly said, my name is Jim Moeller, and I'm the forest health specialist in the eastern half of the state. And so we're gonna cover 5 topics, and we're gonna probably move pretty quick in order to get everything done. But the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the emerald ash borer. So the emerald ash borer is a wood-boring insect that's native to Asia. It attacks all ash species, including white fringe tree. It was first found in the United States in southeast Michigan in 2002, but it most likely arrived in the early 90s in wood crating or pallets. Here in North Carolina, it was first found in 2013 in Granville County. So just as kind of a little refresher of what to look for with emerald ash borer, here we have some canopy dieback in the left slide there. Then in the center, we kind of have those serpentine galleries. You might see some split bark. You peel that back, see those galleries. And then, of course, we have some epicormic sprouting that is occurring. All those are indicators that something is going on and perhaps EAB. Another telltale sign is the D-shaped exit hole that the insect makes. And this is actually an insect right here that we caught this spring. That is the adult EAB. So what are we doing to monitor the spread of the emerald ash borer? Well, we set out purple prism traps, and those are essentially purple triangles with a sticky substance on the outside of them that we bait with a lure. It attracts the insect flies into the lure, and then we come back into the trap, we come back and check it, and if we have some, we'll take them to be identified. We try to set our traps in places that we suspect that there are EAB present. So again, the emerald ash borer oftentimes will attack the canopy of a tree first, which makes it very difficult because we're at ground level to tell what's going on. So if we see some dieback or epicormic sprouting, that's an area that we would likely hang a trap, or it could just be adjacent to another county that it has been located in. So we try to deploy our traps to coincide with the adult emergence of the insect. This year that happened, I'd say mid-April through mid-May is when the adult emergence was occurring. We trapped in 7 counties with 14 traps. And I'm sad to say, I guess, that we have 3 new positives in the state, which are Lee, Craven, and Cumberland. So that brings the grand total up to 70 in the state. We select the purple prism trap. That's it all the way on the right here, because if you notice, the insect's abdomen has a purplish hue to it, and also young ash leaves have this kind of purplish color to them. So not only is that lure attracting them, but the color is as well. So this is the current map as of now of the extent of emerald ash borer in the state. Lee County is kind of right in here, and then Cumberland's right here, and then Craven. I would like to point out that you may suspect that you have emerald ash borer outside of this green hashed area, and that very well may be true. And if so, please let us know, let your county ranger know. We'd like to come out and take a look, maybe hang a trap. We like to keep this map as up to date as possible so that we can let landowners know where the beetle is occurring so that they can take action. Landscape wise, there's not a whole lot that you can do, but if you do have some high value trees, there are treatment options. The next topic we'll discuss is laurel wilt. So laurel wilt is a disease vectored by the red bay ambrosia beetle. This also is a native to Asia. Laurel wilt was first found in Savannah, Georgia in 2002, and it also most likely arrived in wood crating or pallets. It was first found in North Carolina in 2011, and it also attacks and kills healthy trees. So what trees are susceptible in North Carolina? Red bay, sassafras, spicebush, and pondberry, which is federally endangered. To date, we have only found laurel wilt in red bay and sassafras, but just letting you know what else could be affected by that. On the left, I have a slide here of laurel wilt in a red bay tree, and this is a very classic photograph of it. You can see that the leaves have this purplish brown hue to them. So when the tree is infected, the wilt clogs up the vascular system of the tree, the fungus does, and it causes it to wilt. Red bay is relatively persistent as far as it keeping its leaves on after they've wilted. So it makes our surveying efforts for this a little easier. We can do it in the wintertime when everything else is leaf off. So there's that. On the right slide here's photograph, we have laurel wilt and sassafras. This is a little bit more difficult. You can see in this photograph that it is just starting to kind of turn yellowish. There is some brown occurring there and some darkness. And the problem with sassafras is that once it is infected, its leaves will turn brown and they're not very persistent. They won't hang on and they'll fall off. So it makes surveying a little bit harder. It's easier to do in the growing season. Again, here on the left, this is in spicebush. This was taken in Virginia, and you can see that it has kind of the same effect that sassafras does, where the leaves are going to turn a yellowish, then to brown, and they won't hang on very long. So again, difficult. You almost have to catch it in the act, so to speak. And then on the right here, we have red bay that is infected with laurel wilt. One of the techniques that we use in the field to determine if it is laurel wilt is to cut into the tree and look for this vascular streaking, this dark color there. And once we see that, then that's a pretty good indicator that we have laurel wilt. It is important to note that if you suspect that you have laurel wilt and you cut into a tree, that you can transfer that fungus. So it's important that you clean your blade or your knife, whatever you're using to cut into that tree with alcohol or bleach, something like that, to sanitize it. So where are we? This is where we're at to date. We did not find laurel wilt in any new counties so far this year, but we were able to kind of close in some gaps from Jones over into Craven and Carteret County. This growing season, we plan on kind of getting up to the north more in Harnett, Johnston, Wayne, Wilson, Green, Pitt. So areas where we might see some sassafras and see it moving in there. It does seem to move a little bit more rapid in sassafras than it does in red bay. But looking at the big picture, right? So you can see that the southeast part of the state is pretty well covered up. The counties are lit up. But if you start looking to the southwest and the west and even to the north, you're seeing it in Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia. So we're also going to step up our efforts this summer in the growing season to see if we can find areas where laurel wilt has crept into the state. The next thing we'll talk about is southern pine beetle. So southern pine beetle has long been considered the most destructive forest insect in the South. It has these cyclical populations with outbreaks periodically. All pines are susceptible. One of the telltale signs is the S-shaped galleries that you can locate under the bark, as opposed to the H, I, and Y that you might see with Ips. There's also the pitch tubes. Pitch tubes with southern pine beetle generally are in the bark crevices versus on the plates themselves. So that can be something to look on as well. But what are we doing to monitor the southern pine beetle population in the state? Well, the first thing that we do is we have a pretty extensive trapping network. We trap in over a third of the state, so 39 counties we set traps in. The traps are baited with a lure. When we go through those traps, what we're looking for is not only southern pine beetles caught, but also clarid beetles caught. So which are the predators. So we want to kind of see, what does the population look like? Is there a big predator buildup, or is there a bunch of southern pine beetle buildup and no predator beetles? It might let us know that something bigger could be occurring. It is also important to realize that it is just one snapshot in a county in the state. So you could have a spot somewhere and there'd be a trap that says there was no southern pine beetle in the area. Another thing that we do is aerial surveys. So we conduct forest health flights. These flights will be kicking off in the next few weeks here with assistance from the districts and the forest health staff. We try to survey at a minimum 20% of the state. And what we're looking for is beetle spots, but also other forest health disturbances that we could see aerially. So these three charts represent the catch data. So the chart all the way on the left is the Southern Group of State Foresters kind of total. So you can see the trap count is really high. There's 503 traps, and you can see how many southern pine beetles there were and clarids and how many there are per day of each. The center chart here is North Carolina's data from this year. So we, as the Forest Service, set out 39 traps. The Fish and Wildlife Service set out 3, and the U.S. Forest Service set out the remainder. And you can see what our numbers are like. So there's roughly 2.4 clarids per day and 1.5 southern pine beetles a day. And on the far right, this is last year's data, and this is just the Forest Service's total that we had, and you can see what those numbers are. So what does that correlate to is this map. So the warmer the color, kind of the more potential. So you can see there's a few yellows and greens, and the rest are blues. The darker colors that background the counties are historically, these are southern pine beetle outbreak areas where there's a little bit higher potential. So the Dare Peninsula, of course, there's several factors going on out there that may be leading to having an uptick in southern pine beetle trap count, as well as down on the Croatan. So it's important to note that we've seen 4 spots this year. None of them have been particularly large. We're going to check on them again soon when we can get up in the air. But they don't seem to be going at a great rate of pace at the last time we saw them. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to southern pine beetle and bark beetles is that we as humans have relatively short memories. 6 months ago in November, this is what the drought monitor looked like. We had anywhere from abnormally dry in the east all the way to severe drought in the west. And this is as of May 16th, and I suspect it might change after this weekend as well. You can see that the drought is kind of lessened in much of the state. The trees, however, the stress remains for them. So just keep that in mind as we have these kind of micro droughts that seem to be becoming more frequent, that can cause stress and can lead towards bark beetle issues. All right, the next thing that we would like to talk to you about is the forest tent caterpillar. This is a native insect. It is a bottomland hardwood defoliator. There's a host of different things that it likes to eat, a generalist, as you'd say. This insect has been defoliating acres and acres for several years now. We will report to you that last year it defoliated approximately 51,000 acres. This year it's gone up slightly to 59,000 acres, but the populations are kind of in the same areas. So the Chowan River has some defoliation in it, the Roanoke River bottom, the Lumber River, and the White Marsh. They all seem to be hitting the same areas pretty good. So that is still ongoing. It oftentimes goes unreported just because of where the defoliation occurs. It's in these bottomland areas that not many people are going to. Maybe a road crosses through there, they might see some defoliation, but otherwise it's just large expanses of not very hospitable terrain. It also happens in early spring. So the trees are able to re-leaf out. And you can actually see that if you look where the mouse is on the left-hand picture, you can see a lighter green, and that's actually the trees re-leafing out after the defoliation. So that is something that we track as well. And the last thing I'd like to talk to you today about is the spotted lanternfly. Hopefully this is not something new to you, but it is a non-native invasive insect that was first found in Pennsylvania in 2014. And it was first detected in June of 2022 here in North Carolina. It's primarily an agriculture, ornamental, and nuisance pest. It's a generalist, so it feeds on a host of different things. Its preferred host is tree of heaven, which is also an invasive species. But this photograph here really drives home the nuisance side of it. and it swarms for no particular reason. It secretes honeydew, and it produces sooty mold and fungal mats, and it attracts bees and other stinging insects and ants. So it's definitely a nasty critter, and we don't want it around. But that doesn't seem to be feasible. Hopefully we can keep it at bay, but these maps don't show to be too promising. So in December of 2018 is the photograph on the left, the map on the left, and you can see that the population was pretty well centered in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, a little bit of Delaware, and then one isolated county in Northern Virginia. Now, as of March 2023, you can see that it's really spread out, jumping states all the way out to Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and as far south as us here in North Carolina. So this insect travels really well. It's a definite hitchhiker. Our population currently in the state is in the Kernersville area. It's kind of straddles Guilford and Forsyth County. So keep an eye out for that. Should you suspect that you see this insect, there's Plant Industry, who is in the Department of Agriculture, has a link set up for you to report that. It's very painless. You just submit a picture, some basic information, and they'll go ahead and check it out. There are still efforts underway to try to contain the spotted lanternfly infestation that is out there. There's folks today from Plant Industry and the Forest Service surveying for insects so that they can be treated later this summer. It's been a total team effort as far as ag, Plant Industry, APHIS, the North Carolina Forest Service. There's been a lot of hours put into this and a lot of good teamwork, so that it's really promising. I'd also like to highlight that Dr. Oten with NC State Extension is doing a lot of work with the spotted lanternfly. Because we are the furthest south that the insect has been, there's new host plants. The life cycle of the insect could be different. So those are all things that are going on right now with that. So as of now, it's still the population that we knew about, and hopefully we can keep it that way. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Brian.
Hey, Brian, you're muted still, and we're not seeing any slides if you're trying to share them.
There it goes. The video is not working either, but I can go ahead without video if that's all right.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about thousand cankers disease. Let's see here. So thousand cankers disease is a complex that's causing issues with our walnut trees. So this is a disease that consists of a pathogen, a vector, and a host. So in simpler terms, you've got a fungus, you've got a beetle, and you've got your walnut trees. So how fast does it kill black walnuts? It can take 5 to 10 years before it actually kills it. It's 1,000 cankers, kind of like that, death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's kind of the same thing. So you've got a bunch of cankers eventually end up girdling the tree. You don't really know you've got it. Symptoms actually show up about 2 to 3 years just before the tree starts to die. One important factor is that drought is a likely contributor to this situation. So what do you look for? You basically look for a declining tree. So here's your walnut tree right there. You can see some dieback on the ends of the branches. That's usually where it starts. See some off color going on there. Flagging is the main thing we look for. So if you see, especially throughout the summer, midsummer, you see these areas flagging right there. Basically the leaves starting to die back, change colors, falling off the tree. that's what you want to look for. And when we're looking for this disease doing surveys and stuff, those are the trees that we target for setting our traps. This is how little this guy is. You look at the penny right there, and you look at this little insect right there. It's about just a little bit bigger than that letter I right there in a penny. So it is a very small critter, and it can be very aggravating when we're trapping to try to find one of these in a mess of other stuff that we caught in our trap. Down below, you can see the galleries. That's the galleries that it bores underneath the bark and makes those galleries in there. And so that's where they hang out. So you don't see them a whole lot out and about. They can be very prolific. This was in Colorado. They took two 18-inch logs and put them in a chamber to see what would emerge from these logs, and they counted 23,040 beetles. I wouldn't want to be the grad student that had that job, but they can produce in very high numbers. That's where you get this many beetles, you get that many cankers. That's where you have your problems there. So I tried to find a more current map. Luckily, I didn't look terribly hard, but I looked hard enough, and 2015 is the most current map. So that's a good sign. If they're not updating maps on a regular basis, that means that there's not as big a concern as there used to be. You can kind of see where this has been found on these dashed lines right here. It's been found in all of these areas. North Carolina is shaded there. We did find this insect in North Carolina. We found the insect, we found the disease. It's only in two places. It's in the Smoky Mountains in Haywood County. So the fact that it's been around for this long and it's not spreading to other walnut trees and other counties, that's a really good sign. I think drought seemed to be a really big contributing factor in this whole process. Once we started getting rainfall after 2016, 2017, started getting wetter weather, apparently even the places where research were going to try to do more studies on these insects and the disease, they had a hard time finding them in areas where they were just inundated with them a year or two before. So good news is it looks like this may not be as big an issue as anticipated, which is always exciting. We are still trapping. We've been trapping for over 10 years now. We put about 50 traps out a year across the state. And so far, we have not caught a single insect, which is a really good thing. So far, so good on 1,000 cankers. Walnuts seem to be in good shape, but if you got to be diligent, make sure we know what's going on and keep looking for it, not just slack off. So far, so good on that pest. The next one I'm going to talk about is sudden oak death. So sudden oak death is a very interestingly named disease. It's not very sudden. It affects other trees besides oak, and it doesn't always lead to death. But it's a really cool name, and people remember it. And every time somebody has an oak tree die, they think they have sudden oak death. So this is why I'm talking about it. Try to give everybody an update on where it is, how bad it is, how good it is, that kind of thing. So to give you a little bit of a background, this is the canker right here. This is on the tan oak out in California. And so the red is just the color underneath the bark. And this is a bleeding canker right here. So oak trees get cankers all the time and wounds and things like that. So you can't tell that you've got sudden oak death just by looking at these signs and symptoms right here. But that's kind of what it does. It just creates multiple cankers and ends up killing these oak trees. So where does the fungus like to live? It's a Phytophthora, fungus-like organism. It's very numerous. It'll live on over 100 different hosts. Red bay or California bay laurel and Douglas fir. One's a conifer, and the other one is a broadleaf tree. And the pathogen just doesn't care. It'll grow on either one of them. It likes to grow on anything kind of where there's moisture. That's one of our concerns here, is because we have a lot of understory like rhododendron, that it would be a good host for it. But typically when it's on these other plants, it does not cause mortality. It's just there doing its thing. And this is what it looks like. You just got some kind of lesion, a little bit of dead material on a leaf. There's nothing really exciting about that. If you walk through a rhododendron slick, you see stuff with these colors, that brown spots and stuff on those leaves all the time. So to figure out if you have sudden oak death, it's a little complicated. You either have to culture it using a petri dish, or you can send it off to a lab and run a PCR or DNA diagnostic. process. So it's not the cheapest thing to figure out if you have sudden oak death on your tree or in an area. Our biggest risk right here, you can kind of see this risk map. This was developed a long time ago, but it's still very current. These little small pink areas, the octagons, that's where our highest risk areas are based on host, based on climate, and on topography. And we've got the Appalachian Mountains, the western part of the state is definitely the most concerning area for sudden oak death if it was to get established. Especially with the rhododendron understory near the creeks with some good moisture and an oak overstory around it, that would be a bad combination. So the way this pathogen moves across the country is through the nursery trade most of the time. That's how you grow a lot of plants out west. It's amazing how North Carolina we can have rhododendron everywhere, but we still bring rhododendron in from out west to sell to our yard. People plant them in their yards and their backyards and stuff like that. So we bring everything in across the country. So we're probably going to bring something else we don't want. And this is what happened in 2005. Made my life really hard. I was actually working in forest health at the time. And all these X's across the country were places that received, states that received potentially infected plant material from nurseries. And North Carolina had 69 potential introductions in the state. We looked and surveyed all of them. The good news is that only one nursery in North Carolina still has a positive find in there. So we go out to that nursery and survey it every year since 2006. And so far, it has not left that nursery. We're finding it in water. So it's the only place in North Carolina where it has actually moved out of the nursery into the natural environment. It is an urban area in Charlotte area. So it's not as concerning as it would be in the western part of the state, but it's been out for a long time and it has not spread to other plant life, other trees, which is really a good thing. And just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable about sudden oak death, it's only been found outside of a nursery on a live tree one time since 2005. So only one tree has ever been infected with sudden oak death outside of a nursery with a naturally infected, and that tree was actually killed by researchers collecting samples from it so much. So the fact that it hasn't spread and it's had plenty of opportunities, that's a really good thing. I think we're feeling comfortable that there's something on the East Coast that is not helping it to get established like there is on the West Coast. There's some combination that it doesn't look like it's going to cause us significant problems. But you have to be diligent. You never know. Hemlock woolly diligent was found in Richmond in the 1950s, and then it wasn't until the 80s when it became a big severe issue. So sometimes this stuff can just simmer around and we'll see what happens. But so far, so good on sudden oak death. We are doing surveys. We survey nurseries every year. We used to use these leaves and float them on top. It was a pretty cool survey until you had a flood and they got washed downstream. So we've started converting to a bottle of bait. We just collect a bottle of water, put a leaf in it, and then send the leaves off to a lab for analysis. So that's a lot more, not simpler and more enjoyable process. Next, we're moving on. This is a little bit more of a serious issue. It's the white pine bass scale and Policiopsis canker. It's been around for a while. The research started back in the early 2000s on it. Didn't seem like it was a big issue. It's been all across the whole East Coast, the native range of white pine, eastern white pine, and it just seemed to be showing up in overstock stands, stressed trees, younger trees didn't seem to be a big issue, but now we're finding it on larger trees. And so that's where we're getting concerned. I was actually on a Zoom meeting early this morning talking with the U.S. Forest Service and University of Georgia, trying to come up with some studies to give us some direction on what to do. So what happens here is there's a bass scale, and this is a very, very, very tiny insect. You about need a hand lens to see it. It prefers to stay under hidden areas, like under lichen, where their branch nodes come together. They need a thin area of bark where they can pierce the cambium and to suck the nutrients. And they're not necessarily the problem. They're the driving force of the problem, but they don't produce the fungus or spread the fungus that causes these cankers. It's the cankers find the sites that have the scale has been feeding on, Those insertion points is where the canker just colonizes very well. That's where it gets established, and that's when it starts creating these cankers that cause some problems. So Caliciopsis canker is the end result of this combination of insect and disease. And that's where we're starting to see mortality from other problems. You can see the fruiting bodies sort of. I'm never good at finding them, but I'm older and need glasses. But it looks like little eyelashes coming up out of the bark. It's usually easier to find on very small trees, not on branches and things like that, but small understory seedlings. That's where you usually find them, on some saplings and stuff like that. How does it work? I kind of mentioned this earlier. The cankers do become established at these feeding sites. What happens sometimes, a tree, if it's growing well, it can actually grow over the canker and not have problems. We've seen it on 6-year-old established white pines in a planted field, and didn't seem to have any issues. That you could see where the canker was, but the growth was going good, no problems. So it just kind of depends on the situation. What you look for are dying needles, usually at the lower branches. Oozing sap, you can see sap pouring down. That's most likely caused by this disease and cankers in that area. And you will see white pine mortality. This is an understory picture. It's hard to tell, but pretty much the large percentage of the white pines that were in the understory, and they can stay there for a while because they're shade tolerant, just kind of wipe them all out. So what do we do right now? We're looking into research and monitoring. We're not having any drastic recommendations at this point to clear cut your timber or never plant white pine, but we're going to try to monitor and see what's going on. We just found out about some permanent plot sites that were set up by the University of Georgia throughout different parts of the Appalachians, and we're going to try to find those sites and see what has changed over the last 10 years. They were established about 12 years ago, hasn't been looked at since then, or the last 10 years hasn't been looked at, and we're going to try to see. That's a good starting point, just to see what's going on, what trends have happened, and is it getting worse, better, is it fluctuate, or whatever. So that's where we are in that area. Next thing I want to talk about briefly is fall cankerworms. This is the female. She lays eggs in the fall. That's why they get the name fall cankerworms. They actually do the foliating in the spring. There's also a spring cankerworm. Spring cankerworm lays their eggs in the spring. Fall cankerworm lays them in the fall, but they still just eat all the time. They're an early defoliator. And so this is an area up in Watauga County, and you can kind of see this area where it's been defoliated. We went up there, Jim, Wayne, and I went up there, and about 1,800 acres, I believe, is what was defoliated at the time. And you can look here and see this area right here. This is the woods that we were looking at over there. This is summertime, and it looks like it's winter. It's completely defoliated a large percentage of these trees and all different species. And this is an upland hardwood site, about 5,000 feet elevation. So this is what we looked at on the ground level. You can see this was early June, and you can see what kind of defoliation was going on, fairly significant. Then we went back, what we hoped would happen in other areas where they're more common in Virginia. We don't really see them, and this is the first episode I've seen of them in Western North Carolina, other than Charlotte. They're usually an urban pest. So we haven't seen them in the wooded area for my whole career here. They do get them up in Virginia sometimes, but we hope they defoliate early in the spring, the trees flush out and hopefully recover and do all right. We went back and looked at this in August after they should have all fleshed out. I think because of the very short growing season, high elevation, they didn't really get a whole lot of benefit from pushing these leaves out. So we're kind of concerned to see where it's going to happen. So we're going to go up and look at it later on this year, see what's happening. We've got some satellite imagery that's suggesting that this area may have spread to a couple other nearby areas. So fall cankerworms may have moved off of this one particular property owner and gone to some other properties. So we'll just see what happens. Typically, it just runs its course. You have some mortality, but it's usually stressed trees. You usually have mortality when you have multiple trees, or you get trees defoliated for multiple years. So if it gets defoliated, loses its leaves 2 or 3 times, it's used up its nutrients, doesn't have much left, and it dies. So we'll see what happens here. Urban areas like Charlotte they have done aerial spraying in the past, and they've had some success with that. So it can be controlled that way. Last thing I want to talk about is needle cast. What you can tell about needle cast is you can look at the last year's needles versus this year's needles. This year's needles are going to be very green and healthy looking. The last year's needles below them are going to be brown, yellow, and having issues. So a little bit here on needle cast versus needle spot. A needle cast typically occurs at one time when conditions are right. So it's usually one major infection time, late spring, early summer. It happens once, it gets established, and that's just where it stays. It doesn't spread throughout the year or throughout the growing season. Whereas needle spot, they have a very short incubation period and they will spread throughout the year when the conditions get right, when the moisture level gets right, temperature gets right. That's when it will spread throughout the year. And so that's how you can tell the difference. Needle cast is not a concern. Needle spots apparently can be somewhat of a concern. We're learning more about that with some brown spot issues going on across the Southeast. So what to look for needle cast infections, they get started on the young current year needles. So they get on the needles this spring, but you don't see problems until the late fall next spring, typically after the next year once the new needles have flushed out. Symptoms aren't of the infection are not evident until that time. So usually winter or spring is when they've started doing their damage and the needles are starting to fall off. Again, the new growth appears unaffected and you don't have to, excuse me. And so you don't have to worry about the new growth, and it's considered a minor stressor. That's one good thing about this. As long as the trees, whether it's hardwood, conifers, whatever, as long as they have the majority of their foliage still intact, they're usually in pretty good shape. They can lose a third of their foliage and still be considered at a healthy level. You don't want to do that every year, but you can do that one time and the trees are still healthy and still doing well. So this is considered a minor stressor. But the reason this came up is we had, and these aren't the best pictures, but it's the best I could do. We had Table Mountain pine in Madison County. First of all, I've never seen a Table Mountain pine stand, but these were pure Table Mountain pine stands, probably from past burns or things like that. And what happened was there was a complete defoliation of all the needles in these stands early spring. And what was kind of concerning to us, that's why we call the U.S. Forest Service folks in, is that it happened before this current year's needles came out. So without seeing this new growth, we're like, what happened? Did it lose all this year's new growth, or what's going on? Is it delayed? Is it frost damage? What other's going on? But it's not common, but this needle cast actually landed on these needles and defoliated them completely before the growing season started. And we sent some samples off. We don't know what species it was. It's not something anybody's familiar with, but I don't think it's anything anybody's real concerned about either. So they're not spending time and money diagnosing and figuring out what species actually occurred here. But we went back in the summertime, looked at it, everything looked great. They showed no signs of decline, so everything looked good. So this has been a before and after. We've run you through the rinse cycle pretty hard. We've thrown a lot of insects and diseases at you, what's going on. Hopefully some of this made sense. And I guess I will stop sharing and let Jim Sly kind of close us out here before we do any questions.
Okay, let me share my screen and share my next presentation. Okay, so where do we go from here with our forest health in North Carolina? Well, you've noticed that we've had a curious mix of native and invasive insects and disease organisms that we've seen in our state. And we've actually last year had around 70 different observations of different forest health organisms in our state by our staff. Again, some of them are native, some are invasive, but the invasives have become increasingly a bigger focus. We've seen, shifts during the careers of some of us from a focus on things like southern pine beetle and those native pests to increasingly more and more invasives. So that occupies a lot more of our time, but it's been going on for a while. If you look back through the course of time, back into the 1500s when the first Spanish expeditions came into the southeastern United States, DeSoto even came up into parts of North Carolina, and there were organisms being introduced then. you know, so things like Scotch pine, dandelion, lamb's quarter, which can still be a problem in old field sites, and others were introduced pretty early on. Wild hog is a good example of a organism that was introduced early on. So it hasn't started recently. It's been going on for a while. Most folks in natural resources are aware of the chestnut blight, which was really introduced sometime around the early 1900s, 1904, and spread throughout the range of the native range of the chestnut. But a lot of people aren't aware that Phytophthora cinnamomyi was already out there, had been introduced very early on in the 1700s, and was also impacting chestnut, particularly in the southeast and other areas, but and other plants as well besides chestnut. So, you know, North Carolina, Guilford, Surrey, and Stokes were the first counties that were infested with chestnut blight in 1913, and by 1940, the whole chestnut range in North Carolina was pretty generally infested. And there's just a few of the pictures many of you have probably seen in different locations that just illustrate the loss of that keystone species in our ecosystem. Dutch elm disease is another one that's commonly on people's radar screens. Was introduced in 1930 in the United States, a vascular disease. 1962 made its way to North Carolina around Greensboro. It's vectored by the native elm bark beetle and smaller European elm bark beetles. And it really was a thing that affected our high value landscape trees more so than anything else. Elm, by the way, is not eradicated. Mature American elm are still very common in the bottomland forests of the coastal plain and other areas of North Carolina. So it's still out there, but still a problem. The spongy moth, again, that turn of the century time frame from the mid 1850s all the way into the 1900s. It moved throughout the northeastern states and headed south. And North Carolina, we have one county and we have a part of another county that's under the federal quarantine, and that's been holding pretty firm since 1982. The Slow the Spread program that's been initiated through our state plant industry division, and the trapping and the treatments that are done there has been very effective, and that's largely in part due to the pheromones that have been isolated and the ability to use mating disruptors as a way to stop the spread of that insect. But we cooperate with that program through our plant industry division and help with that. And there's a visualization of what that Slow the Spread program looks like. You can see the line stops more or less at the North Carolina border, and those treatments have been very effective over the years. One point that I like to make about invasive insects relates to this slide right here. This is the first time that we produced a map in the state that showed the distribution of some of the invasive insects and diseases that were invading our state. And this was 2013. So you can see laurel wilt coming in from the south. You can see emerald ash borer coming down from the north, thousand cankers disease. And then if you look at the latest version of that map, you can see that the game has changed a good bit over the last 10 years. You can see that we're pretty generally infested across the state with fairly recent invasives. And that's the story that I wanted to tell there. You know, we're continuing to see things come into the state. Elm zigzag sawfly is one of the latest. It was found in Surrey and Stokes counties, actually identified by one of our assistant county rangers up there. Good job doing that. It's a non-regulated pest, so as such, there's no quarantines associated with it. But it's a major defoliator of elm trees, and you can see the larvae there as they drop to the ground and get ready to pupate in the soil. And there's the interesting thing about that is that it was found in 2021 in Canada, 2022, or wait a minute, 2020 in Canada, 21 in Virginia, 22 in North Carolina. So a very fast moving insect. You know, it's since been found in some other states as well. So we're actually doing some surveys this summer to try to determine the extent of that across the state. Asian longhorn beetle is just to our south in South Carolina. That's the first known population outside of the Northeast. This is a little different. It's not in an urban setting. It's in coastal swamps down around Charleston, South Carolina. A lot harder situation to control that insect in. A lot harder to remove a red maple tree affected with Asian longhorn beetle in a coastal swamp than it is on a street side somewhere, or even an upland stand. And you can see the size of that insect. The saving grace on that insect, it's a major structural pest for these trees, but it's not a very fast mover. It moves very small distance each year. You can see a few other illustrations that show just what kind of damage that creates. And invasive plants are a huge issue in our state. It's one we focus on the insects and disease quite frequently, but oftentimes we ignore the invasive plants. And they include trees, they include shrubs, vines, herbs, grasses. And here's just a partial list of some of the ones that occur in our state. And many of them are very tough to get under control and are major competitors with native flora and major competitors in forestry operations and so forth. One of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one, largely considered to be a top 10 invasive in the world is Kogan grass. Very, very competitive. It can be a fire problem. It's an ecological issue. It's been found in around a dozen places in the state. And to date, most of those are eradicated. Some of them are still under ongoing control. And with that, I want to end up with these two slides again, side by side for comparison. I think that is the crux of the issue that we're dealing with forest health in North Carolina and beyond North Carolina, nationwide, really, if not worldwide. And that is that we have a lot of invasive insects, diseases, and plants that are on the move, and other organisms besides insects and diseases and plants as well. Snails, for example, that are on the move. With global trade, it's something that we're going to have to continue to keep an eye on and be vigilant on to make sure that we can respond correctly to the next big pest that comes our way. And with that, I will turn it over to any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys very much for the presentations and everything. At this time, we are open for questions. So if you have questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A feature of Zoom. All you got to do is click on the Q&A icon down in the lower menu, and it'll give you the option to enter your question. We do already have a couple questions, and the first one is from Carl DuBolt. Is climate change a major factor in the advance of invasive species?
I'll take that. It is. It affects the spread of organisms, for a short answer. We're actually dealing with things related to climate change with our forest health program as well that are abiotic. Here in coastal North Carolina, we have the effects of sea level rise, so-called ghost forests. We're involved in a cooperative project to map those and try to determine the extent and monitor the extent and change of those forests that are impacted by sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. But it will change the latitude that certain organisms can function at. In some cases, it's not clearly understood exactly how that will play out. But yes, it does have a big effect.
All right, another question from Carl. Any thoughts on converting invasive plant species to useful products for human use?
Well, there actually is some of that has gone on, and we are asked from time to time to weigh in on those types of things. But a good example would be miscanthus or silvergrass that's being used as a biomass crop and as a crop for shavings and that kind of thing down in the eastern part of the state. But those genotypes of that particular plant are rendered sterile for that use. So there are some cases where the invasives are being tapped for biomass and that kind of thing. There are other cases where people are trying to introduce those species for biomass production, and we're very hesitant to advise people on doing that because of the potential negative impacts from those plants.
Okay, the next question, are there any lures for southern pine bark beetles?
Are there any lures? Jim Moeller, you want to field that one? You might be.
Sure. When it comes to trapping, we do use lures. There's a tree stress scent, and then some aggregation pheromones that bring them in. Our trapping that we do for the southern pine beetle, we follow a pretty strict protocol, and there's some stand requirements in there, because the last thing that you want to do is start a beetle spot. But as far as just lure on your own, I'm not familiar with anything that you might do.
I know, and it's and some of the lures that we're using, I mean, if you were to hang them directly on a tree, you could initiate mass attack by southern pine beetles. So those lures are made to be used within that protocol, you know, to try to get the kind of information that we're trying to gather with those traps.
Okay, next question is, any thoughts on the ghost forest spread as a result of aquifer intrusion?
That's something I haven't really looked into that much. I mean, our focus has been mainly on mapping and monitoring more so than on the causative factors. So there might be a question better fielded by somebody with more experience in aquifers than myself, but it potentially could have. There has been concern in eastern North Carolina with, you know, with use of groundwater from, you know, deep water from the aquifers, and possible subsidence and so forth. So it could potentially be an issue there.
Okay, the next question is related to the climate change question, and that is, have storms, example hurricanes, been shown to disperse organisms to fragile ecosystems?
That is correct. In some cases, it has been. You know, the one that comes to mind right offhand is you know, fire ants. You know, after some of the coastal floods we had, it was not unusual for fire ants to move by floodwater on floating debris and just balls of fire ants, you know, that would move from place to place, and it's at least thought in this area that did help distribute that somewhat. We do see a lot of movement of you know, things like saltwater damage inland from, you know, both the surge from coastal storms and also from the wind-blown salt spray and that kind of stuff. And a lot of that will also lead to secondary things like Ips beetles and other things. As far as any others that I know that, you know, well, the wind from that event blew a particular organism further inland, I don't know that any of that's been documented that I know of, at least not in North Carolina.
Okay, another question is, do you need to burn the infected trees to prevent spread of these insects, or can you just cut the trees and let them rot in place in the forest?
Depends on which insect you're talking about. But in a lot of cases, you know, just downing a tree and exposing it to direct sunlight will affect the larvae of a lot of our native pests. With some of the invasive things, of course, you know, if you had that, it would be, you know, recommended to try to dispose of that a little more aggressively. Burning or something of that nature would be more effective to try to get rid of that. And of course, that goes back to our, you know, even putting it under tarps and raising the temperature in some cases is used to try to control some of those organisms. If you can pile it and you have the ability to do that, if that answers the question.
Okay, the last question is, any thoughts on the encroachment? Any thoughts on the encouragement of natural biodiversity for healthy forests?
And the encouragement of natural biodiversity. I guess I'm not hearing the question exactly right.
That was the question, was any thoughts on the encouragement of natural biodiversity for healthy forests?
Well, I mean, cornerstone of forestry is diverse forest. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So anytime that you can have, different species that are being managed for, gives you a variety of tree species in the forest. So if one is affected by insect or disease pest, then the others may not be. In the case of some invasives, they tend to be more broad spectrum pests, and some tend to be more species specific. So in the case of those, it's hard to tell, depends on which insect that you're dealing with. But yes, in general, the more diverse forest ecosystems that you have, the more resilient they will be to impact from insects and disease pests, and abiotic pests for that matter.
Okay, we have one last question, is that can you bury the logs with soil as a way to reduce the spread?
Again, that's a sort of a species specific thing, but small areas that could be a legitimate control for downed material that had a particular pest in it, but not broad scale, not applicable on that large scale.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate the questions, and to give a round of applause to our presenters today and thank them for taking the time out of their day to put the materials together and share it with us. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And with that, we'll bring this webinar to an end.